Visión comunal, en contacto con las comunidades.
Venezuela in the news. News from the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela.
Headlines. OPEC and non-OPEC countries reached an agreement to limit production. Venezuela will present a plan to stabilize the oil market for 10 years. Nicolás Maduro held a bilateral meeting with Vladimir Putin. The Venezuelan government announced yesterday that the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries and other world producers from outside the organization reached an agreement to limit the crude oil production. After a bilateral meeting with the Russian President Vladimir Putin, the Venezuelan head of state, Nicolás Maduro, informed that the agreement between the OPEC and non-OPEC countries, quote, was a fact, close quote. The details of the scope of the agreement will be clarified on Wednesday in an extraordinary meeting that will take place in Istanbul, Turkey. The OPEC, at the end of September in Algeria, decided to cut 700,000 barrels per day of its quota. Other oil giants such as Russia will join the proposal of limiting production. On November 30th in Vienna, the quota for each producer will be determined. It is also projected to announce when the OPEC agreement will enter into effect. The Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro informed that the government will present in Istanbul a plan that will allow to stabilize the oil market for 10 years. The key points of the ambitious project will be explained in the workshops and alternative meetings that will be held during the World Energy Summit, which began yesterday in Turkey with the presence of delegations and companies from 90 countries. Maduro explained that it was necessary for the producers to determine a cycle that allows the economic expansion. He also called to prevent factors from penetrating and corrupting the oil market with speculative strategies. Venezuela has the largest certified resources of the planet and also foresees to become the fourth world power of gas. Currently, it stands among the first 8 nations with the largest gas reserves in the world. The Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro held a bilateral meeting with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin during the World Energy Summit that began yesterday in Turkey. Caracas and Moscow maintain more than 60 strategic cooperation areas, including the energy sector. Both nations seek the political and diplomatic routes that allow to recover and stabilize the oil prices, which since mid-2014 lost more than 70% of their value. Venezuela also aimed the support of Azerbaijan in a bilateral meeting held between the president of that nation, Ilham Aliyev, and Nicolás Maduro. After the fall of the crude oil prices, several world producers had to recognize that they weren't covering the cost of production.
Venezuela in the news.
The Turkish head of state, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, announced that he will visit Caracas in February to sign several bilateral agreements in strategic areas. Erdogan met yesterday in Istanbul with the Venezuelan president, Nicolás Maduro. At the end of the meeting with Erdogan in the palace of Yildiz Medellin, Maduro informed that both governments decided to expand relations and investments. Caracas will analyze whether or not to supply fuel to Global Liman, the largest port and cruise operator in the world. Global Liman is present in the regions of the Mediterranean and Pacific Asia and maintains important trading port operations in Turkey and Montenegro. It also plans to continue the expansion of its operations in the Caribbean region, the main cruise market in the world. The Bolivarian National Armed Forces initiated yesterday the inspection of the country's public health centers to determine the conditions of medical supplies and other strategic factors. A report revealed to the press stated that the armed forces, in case of detecting any shortage, will coordinate the immediate provision of pharmaceutical products. Since the end of September, the Bolivarian National Armed Forces is responsible for the Pharmaceutical Elaboration Service, one of the platforms used by the government to distribute 85% of medicines in Venezuela. Until last month, the CEFAR has directly distributed in hospitals and health centers in the country 350 million units of medicines and medical and surgical materials.
News from the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela.
Headlines. OPEC and non-OPEC countries reached an agreement to limit production. Venezuela will present a plan to stabilize the oil market for 10 years. Nicolás Maduro held a bilateral meeting with Vladimir Putin.
Venezuela in the news. News from the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela.
Visión comunal, en contacto con las comunidades.